Okay, I've only got 2 pages of notes for this evening's questions, and so this will go nice and quickly here, and we'll get to our prayer time. We are going to be looking at section number 163, Peter's third denial, and section 164, false witnesses are suborned. False witnesses are suborned. Brother Joe, would you get me a dictionary definition of suborned? I was going to describe it later on. I'd like to get a dictionary definition also for that. As we go to look at the scriptures this evening, now what's not going to come out so very quickly tonight, it's not going to be so obvious. You sort of get it as you read through the scriptures, and you might come to notice it. And it is just a little bit of difficulty to follow. We explained this on a couple of other times when we looked at the scriptures from the other sections. But what's not so obvious is the timing of Peter's denial of Christ. The timing is this. Sometimes it says, before the cock crow twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. And then it talks about the cock crowing 1 time. Or it has various ways that it puts it. And so I'd like to remind us that the term cock crow could be referring to a noun and a verb. Okay? Where you have a rooster is actually crowing. But the cock crow could also refer to a time of day. Like, for instance, we say dusk, and we say dawn. Okay, what time is dusk? Depends on what day of the year it is. Okay, dusk starts earlier and later throughout the year, depending on whether we're going into the spring or the summer and the fall or winter. Okay, and dawn also varies from from day to day. But you refer to the dawn. Okay, another figure of speech, another reference to sunrise, is the cock crow, essentially when the alarm goes off. And so there's a little difficulty as you're reading. It's hard to track. Just know that Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and it all happened before the rooster crowed in the morning there, and he ended up turning from Christ. Okay, so we're going to look at section 162 then, section 163, Peter's third denial. It follows right on the heels of his second denial. And I think what is so sad about this is that he had so many opportunities to stand up for Christ. Now, Jesus was going to go to the cross no matter what. But it would be interesting, would people also become martyrs for Christ? And people tend to shy away from that. Before we go to judge Peter, we should remember we're human too, and we have the same possibility. You never know how you are going to act under pressure. Give me just one moment here. On the microphones at home so we don't get extra noises there. Okay. So we have question 924. What did Peter do to hide his speech and behavior? What did Peter do to hide his speech and behavior? This is different from the last couple of questions where he was known by his accent. So what did Peter do to hide his speech and behavior? It's based on Matthew 26:74. Then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew. So the answer we got is C, he cursed and swore. Okay. Now, although C is the correct answer, all 3 of these options are similar, and that each one involves being deceptive and avoiding the truth. Okay, so he tried to shrink back from notice and say nothing. That's a form of deception. Okay, he didn't do that, but that's something that people will do. When they go to deny Christ, they don't actually have to curse and swear. All they have to do is say nothing. Sometimes people are Christians, and nobody would know that they're Christians because they don't really speak up for Christ at all. They might not be bad people. They might not be cursing and swearing, but on the other hand, they're not saying anything for Christ either. Somebody has put it one time this way. They said, if you were ever accused of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Okay? If you had to go to court for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence that would convict you that you were a Christian? That's because a lot of people, they go through their lives, they never say a thing to anybody about Jesus Christ. Now stop and think about that. How many people are dying and going to hell, and how many Christians are silent and don't say a thing? I think especially because we have such pervasiveness of Christianity in the culture, even today, even though you have all the political nonsense that's going on all around us, there's this assumption that, well, people generally are Christian. It is surprising how many people they might have gone to church, they might have grown up in church, they might have been baptized even, not even Christian because they never really got the gospel properly. So a lot of people assume that they're going to heaven. In fact, when we go out talking to people door to door, or we go out on the street to do direct personal evangelism, and we ask people, and generally we'll get people, well, yeah, I'm going to heaven because I hope so, because I'm obeying the 10 Commandments, I'm trying to live for God. What they don't know is that they just revealed that they don't know what the gospel is. Because going to heaven, remember, is not based on how many commandments we obey. It's based on, did you ask Jesus Christ to forgive you for being a sinner? And did you ask him to take your pain and suffering of hell for you? Now that's where the gospel is. Okay? So people, they confuse Christian living with being a Christian. Being a Christian means you ask Jesus to be your Savior. Okay, Christian living is living like what you would expect from the Bible. And so what happens is there are a lot of people that are on their way to hell that we just assume they're going to heaven instead. So shrinking back and saying nothing is certainly as far as you can get from going all out and betraying Christ as Judas did. But either way, whether you're cursing and swearing or saying nothing, you're still denying Christ. Okay, lying by omission can be as bad as telling a whopper. Lying by omission means not saying something when you could. And you're letting falsehood go on. Peter just chose a way to deceptively pass himself off as just a coarse Galilean by cursing and swearing. People often go the extra mile when they backslide and behave shamefully like their former selves in the effort to fit in. How many people, they get around their old friends, and I got to tell you, I hear about this periodically. Okay? It's a common problem. People get out of church and they go around with their old friends, and their mouths can be filled with just the same cursings and dirty jokes and just the same nonsense that's out there. And what they're doing is they're denying Jesus Christ. So it's not surprising because that's what they're most familiar with. Okay, this is one of the reasons why you want to be hanging around with brothers and sisters in the Lord, because as you talk to them, I mean, can you imagine right now how anybody in the middle of a conversation just start letting it rip with all kinds of curse words? Okay, you wouldn't expect that in church. And I know that there are people, and I know what their language is like outside of church, but I see them come in here and they get their language cleaned up. And I'm thankful that they're hanging around Christians, because the more they hang around Christians, the more practice they're getting to be able to speak without using curse words. It's a sign of ignorance. Okay, people that don't have enough vocabulary because they have to resort to the curse words for a shortcut. So it's not surprising that you have it's not surprising to have people today doing that. It is surprising for Peter because he had been hanging around with Christ. I mean, when you're hanging around with God in the flesh for several years, you would expect that you would get into the habit of not using those, but look how quickly he went back to them. Okay, so he cursed and swore. He tried to look like the world. And by the way, that's not the only way people try to look like the world. People will take on the habits of the world. They'll take on the dress of the world. They'll take on the politics of the world, all just so they can fit in. But when you're a Christian, you got to be ready to take a stand for Jesus Christ. Okay, question 925. What convicted Peter about his denial? And I'm going to base that on Luke 22:61. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter, and Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. The answer that you got was B. Jesus turned around and looked upon him. I do this every once in a while when we get to a situation like this, a scripture like this, what it's like to have Christ turn around and look at you. When you have anybody do it, it sort of is very disconcerting, and I'll just do it right now. I'm looking at Tone right now, and he's kind of expectant. Oh, what is he looking at me for? For the same reason I'm looking at Shanuda, okay? And you got to say, you guys, you just experienced it. Carlton, I'm looking directly at you now. Okay, doesn't it feel a little freaky to do that? the guy in the pulpit, he looks right straight at you. Okay, and we'll spare everybody. Well, just do the men. Okay, Mr. Jamil. Okay, when you get all attention on you, okay, then it can feel a little strange. Well, just think about if you had God in the flesh turn around when you let something rip out of your mouth, and Jesus turns around and looks at you, and it's like, what? Okay, he doesn't even have to do that. Just one look from Jesus would do that. And we all probably had a grandmother who could do the same thing, or a mother who could do the same thing to us. Okay, so also, he turned around and looked at them. That was it. Now, the word for look upon here, when it says look upon, is a modified form of the word look. So it carries extra emphasis than to merely look at. There's a preposition that's attached to the word, and in Greek, and it has the idea of really gazing into him. So it wasn't just a quick glance that Jesus gave. It was a searching look. It's like when you're looking straight into the pupils of their eyes kind of look. What is more significant about Peter's conviction was the electrifying moment when Jesus turned and looked into his face. There are some things that don't need to be expressed by words, and sometimes the look speaks louder than words. For A, he was not used to cursing and swearing. Is that what convicted Peter? No. Well, we should be so used to a new language that reverting back to our old way of communicating should be very uncomfortable. It should cause some discomfort to revert back to that. However, of course, that was the least of Peter's problems. And then C, he changed his mind and wanted to identify with Jesus. Okay, no, he did not do that. The greater the pressure on us to do right can lead us into either direction. It could lead us to do the right thing, or it could lead us to do the worst thing. We dig in our heels and we resist doing what we know is the right thing to do. Peter could have just as easily identified with Christ as deny him. One of the most common places to see this happen is in a congressional hearing. The congressman on either side of the aisle, they get some person giving testimony, and they'll ask these pointed questions, and they will try to get the person to answer. I don't know what it is about politicians. They don't know the word yes or no. And so they will dig their heels and they will resist trying to give a direct answer. When it comes to Christ questioning us, we need to be ready to give in right away. Peter did not do that. He took the opposite approach. But what really convicted him was just that knowing Jesus Christ. I think one reason that people, making a note here. One of the reasons that people don't feel conviction over their sin sometimes, they don't know Jesus. And that is one of the bigger problems. They spend no time in prayer. They spend no time in God's Word. They don't hear from Christ. They don't hear about Christ in the preaching. They don't have that real connection. And that's the reason that they don't feel the conviction. Well, that's one reason why people feel so free to just treat God as if he's just not even another person, somebody who's afar off somewhere up in heaven and doesn't even see what's going on. They assume that God doesn't know a thing. And the reason why is because they don't really know Jesus. And the way you know Jesus is to know him through his word today. Okay, question 926. 926. What did Peter do after he faced Jesus? And this is based on Luke 22:62. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. So the answer is C. He went out and wept bitterly. Okay. He stood there and stared as an A. No. He tried to excuse his sin. No. That's something that people will do. Okay. They don't want to give in, so they'll try to explain themselves away as if to excuse things. We're often faced with people in rebellion who don't want to admit that they have done wrong. Being unresponsive or trying to make things seem not so bad by explaining why someone acted so or trying to excuse one's actions are common ways of avoiding guilt. Now, sometimes you don't want to give an explanation so people understand that you really weren't doing what they thought you were doing. But when you're guilty and you try to do that, it doesn't go off well. So C, he went out and wept bitterly. The opposite of avoiding guilt is owning it. Peter was not at the point of actively repenting. That's going to come. Okay? He's sort of actually repenting in a way here, but he's not really actively repenting. The precursor to genuine repentance is remorse. Do you think Peter felt some remorse? Yeah, okay. One of the things about salvation, when you're trying to talk to somebody about making sure that they belong to God, there's a thing that's out there amongst churches that's a problem called quick prayerism or easy believism, and it might have several ways to do it. We sort of want to go up to somebody, we want to explain that if they want to get to heaven, they have to realize they're a sinner and that they deserve to go to hell and that they need to want to get their sins taken care of. Now, there's something a little bit missing in there, and that is not just the desire to get to heaven, okay? Not just guilt over sin. Okay, that's important. Both of those things are very important. But one of the hardest things to try to convey to people is that they have offended God. It's not just that they've done wrong, but that they have offended God. More than being sorry for my sin, I need to be sorry for what I've done to God in my sin. Now both of them are connected. You can't separate them really. But somehow in our minds, in the back of our heads, people don't have the sense of, I have offended the maker of the universe, the God who created all mankind, the God who came to earth to die for sin, the God who came and took my punishment of hell. It's not enough. I mean, if I were to sin against Nancy, for instance, if I were to do something so stupid as that, right? Okay, I would feel bad, but you know what I'd feel worse for? I feel worse for how she's feeling over what I had done. that would cut me deeper than my guilt over my sin myself. And so people, they're more anxious to get out of hell. They're more anxious to get out of being looked at in their sin than they are to deal with God who died for them. And so this remorse, not just for what I have done, but also for whom I have offended, this is an important quality. And I think Peter's figuring it out here. That's why when it says he wept bitter tears, it's a refreshing change in the sequence of events. Tears are often a source of relief. And so there needs to be this reckoning with God, and I think Peter was having it just then. Okay, before I go on to the next section, let me ask if there's some thoughts, some comments. Brother Tone, yes.
That these passages reveal that there are two ways to communicate, that is verbally and non-verbally, and the behavior has been captured by the gospel writers very accurately to describe what they saw, and then gave a meaning to what they saw.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's a saying in Tagalog. It says makuha ka sa tingin. It means a look should be sufficient to make you behave.
Especially if it's coming from him to his daughters, right? Yeah, a look should be sufficient. And in fact, this is it makes me think of just another aspect here. One of the reasons why it's important for believers to be together, because there is nonverbal communication, what Brother Tone is pointing out, as well as verbal communication. One of the tough things when you go to do emails or texts, people can't hear your tone of voice. Okay, they can't see the little smile you got on your face to show that you're actually just fooling around. And sometimes, people can get very offended over an email that and it was never the offense was never intended. Next thing is on a telephone is, again, there are certain things that you can't really tell, but when you're in person with each other, that nonverbal communication also is very important, and Peter just got a load of nonverbal communication dropped on him like that. Okay, somebody else to share something.
Pastor?
Yes.
Yeah, earlier when you were speaking about looking at versus looking upon, it's strange, but when I hear or read look upon, it kind of gives a sense of looking from a higher position, like looking down on, looking upon, than just looking straight at.
Yes. I believe that was actually intended by the word, and it has the idea of looking down into, like when you're looking down into somebody's soul. I think that's exactly what it's conveying. Yeah, I think it was intended to be done that way. Somebody else. Okay. Let's look at question number 164. False witnesses are suborned. Brother Joe, do we have a dictionary definition for that?
Yeah, the dictionary definition from Oxford is: suborned is to bribe or otherwise induce someone to commit an unlawful act, such as perjury.
Okay, and it could be a bribe, it could be something else to pressure them. It doesn't have to be a bribe, it could be a threat as well. In this case, these men were probably going to be bribed. Okay, so question 927. What was the witness pool against Jesus like? And this is going to be Matthew 26, verses 59 to 60. It says, now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came 2 false witnesses. So you have a pool of witnesses to draw from. And what was it like? The answer we got is Okay, B, there were so many stories, but no two were alike. Now, remember, in the back of the book is several pages describing the illegal trial of Jesus Christ. There's all kinds of places where a good defense attorney would declare a mistrial or call for a mistrial and have the case thrown out. But one of these is being able to find witnesses. If you had a capital offense, you had to have at least two witnesses. Okay, so the answer is B. There were so many stories, but no two were alike. Let's look at A. There were so many witnesses anxious to come forward? No, they weren't anxious. Okay, they got witnesses, but they had to finally press somebody to come forward by paying them off. The fact that they had to go seek witnesses should have been a clue that the heart of the people was not in the trial of Jesus. Now, the heart of the people is going to change in a little while as they get the charges drummed up and everything. But this should have given those accusers a clue that they were doing wrong. I mean, for them to have to press so hard to find false witnesses. C, there was testimony that made Jesus worthy of death. Well, throughout the trial of Jesus, there is never an accusation that could charge him with a capital offense. No accusation ever actually gets brought up for which to charge him with a capital offense. It actually never happens. He gets put to death because of they switch things around and try to say that he was fomenting rebellion later on. Okay, so B, with Jesus having been such a public figure, it should have been phenomenally easy to find people who could have matching stories. I mean, he was all over the place teaching so publicly. When the people were brought forward, they tried to oblige the council, but there was no agreement. Question 928. When they finally did have two people talking about a similar event, what problem remained? And we're going to look at Mark 14, verse 57 to 59. It says, and there arose certain and bare false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But neither so did their witness agree together. Okay, so when they finally did have two people, what problem remained? Yeah, they couldn't agree. They couldn't agree. Now, by the way, what they're saying here is not even what actually happened. He didn't say that he was going to destroy the temple with his hand that was made with hands, and then 3 days he was going to build it again without hands. He was referring to his resurrection and the temple of his body. So they were all considered false in their testimony, but the fact that these two are specifically called false witnesses speaks to how they are deliberately lying. Even in this, their details were different. Others described various things about Jesus, but these two spoke of his remarks about the temple being destroyed. So this put Caiaphas, the high priest, into a predicament because without witnesses, it would be illegal to proceed. And so this led to Caiaphas to another illegal procedure, which is going to be coming up next, inducing Jesus to say something incriminating against himself. Now, we know in our modern times here, we got the blessing of a lot of jurisprudence over hundreds of years, and we know here today that you're not allowed to incriminate yourself. We all know about pleading the fifth, okay? Now, none of us should be too familiar with that. In other words, hopefully you haven't been called upon where you had to do that. But that's something that's kind of like common knowledge for us today, that you can't witness against yourself, which is one of the reasons why you're not allowed to torture somebody into making a confession. But back then, it's supposed to be that you couldn't be a testimony against yourself, but they're going to push for this anyhow, and they're going to try to get away with it. Okay, so that brings us to the end of section 164. Let me ask if there's anything anybody would like to add on, any other extra thoughts. Brother Tone, yes.
There's a reason why the gospel writers keep repeating false witnesses, because they were either paid or forced to lie under oath, and they not only perjure themselves, but they also commit the crime of accepting bribe or being threatened. They cannot make an alibi out of it because they know it's false.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just that they were unbelievable witnesses because they couldn't get it straight. False witnesses means that they were, as you're saying, very deliberate about it. They were deliberately lying.